Welcome back, and thank you for joining me again tonight as I read more Dutch fairy tales written by William Elliot Griffis. If you enjoyed these Dutch fairy tales and want even more, check out my Patreon link in the description. Fairy Tale Friday continues next week with stories from Norway. If you would like to be notified when the video is released, press subscribe and then the notification bell if you haven't already. Let me know what country or author you would like me to read fairy tales from in the comments below. And if you want more Dutch fairy tales in a future video, press the like button so I know you enjoyed them and want more. Now, without further ado, get comfortable, relax, and prepare to sleep a wink. The Mouldy Penny. Gold makes a woman penny white, said the Dutch in the days when fairies were plentiful and often in their thoughts. What did the proverb mean? Who ever saw a white penny? Well, that was long ago, when pennies were white, because they were then made of silver. Each one was worth a denarii, which was a coin worth about a shilling or a quarter of a dollar. As the Dutch had pounds, shillings, and pence before the English had them, we see what the D in the signs pounds D means, that is, denarii, or a white penny made of silver. In the old days, before the Dutch had houses with glass windows, or clothes of cloth or linen, or hats or shoes, cows and horses, or butter and cheese, they knew nothing of money and they cared less. Almost everything, even the land, was owned in common by all. Their wants were few. Whenever they needed anything from other countries, they swapped or bartered. In this way, they traded salt for furs, or fish for iron. But when they met with or had to fight another tribe that was stronger or richer, or knew more than they did, they required other things, which the forest and waters could not furnish. So by and by, peddlers and merchants came up from the south. They brought new and strange articles, such as mirrors, jewelry, clothes, and pretty things, which the girls and women wanted and had begged their daddies and husbands to get for them. For the men, they brought iron tools and better weapons, improved traps to catch wild beasts and wagons with wheels that had spokes. When regular trade began, it became necessary to have money of some kind. Then coins of gold, silver, and copper were seen in the towns and villages, and even in the woods and on the heaths of Holland. Yet there was a good deal that was strange and mysterious about these round, shining bits of metal called money. Money, what is money? Asked many a proud warrior disdainfully. Then the wise men explained to the fighting men that money was named after Juno Moneta, a goddess in Rome. She told men that no one would ever want for money who was honest and just. Then, by and by, the mint was in her temple and money was coined there. Then, later in Holland, the word meant money, but many people who wanted to get rich quickly worshipped her. In time, however, the word gold meant money in general. When a great ruler named Charlemagne conquered or made treaties with our ancestors, he allowed them to have mints and to coin money. Then again, it seemed wonderful how the peddlers and the goldsmiths and the men called Lombards, strange long-bearded men from the south who came among the Dutch, grew rich faster than the work people. They seemed to amass gold simply by handling money. When a man who knew what a silver penny would do made a present of one to his wife, her face lighted up with joy. So in time, the word penny white meant the smiling face of a happy woman. Yet it was also noticed that the more people had, the more they wanted. The girls and boys quickly found that money would buy what the peddlers brought. In the towns, shops sprang up, in which were many curious things which tempted people to buy. Some tried to spend their money and keep it too, to eat their cake and have it also. But they soon found that they could not do this. There were still many foolish as well as wise people in the land, even during the new time of money. A few saved their coins and were happy in giving some to the poor and needy. Many fathers had what was called a sparpot, or home savings bank, and taught their children the right use of money. It began to be the custom for people to have family names, so that a girl was not merely the daughter of so-and-so, nor the boy the son of a certain father. And the selection of names, those which had the word penny in them, proved to be very popular. To keep a coin in the little home bank without spending it long enough for it to gather mold, which it did easily in the damp climate of Holland, that is, to darken and get crust on it, was considered a great virtue in the owner. This showed that the owner had a strong mind and power of self-control. So the name Schimmelpennig, or Mouldy Penny, became honorable, because such people were wise and often kind and good. They did not waste their money, but made good use of it. On the other hand, were some mean and stingy folks who liked to hear the coins jingle. Instead of wisely spending their cash or trading with it, they hoarded their coins. That is, they hid them away in a stocking, or a purse, or in a jar, or a cracked cooking pot that couldn't be used. Often they put it away somewhere in the chimney behind a loose brick. Then, at night, when no one was looking, these miserly folks counted, rubbed, jingled, and gloated over the shining coins and never helped anybody. So there grew up 3 sorts of people, called the thrifty, the spendthrifts, and the misers. These last were the meanest and most disliked of all. Others again hid their money away so as to have some when sick or old, and they talked about it. No one found fault with these, though some laughed and said, "A penny in the savings jar makes more noise than when it is full of gold." Even when folks got married, they were exhorted by the minister to save money, so as to have something to give to the poor. Now when the fairies that worked down underground heard that the Dutch had learned the use of money and had even built a mint to stamp the metal, they held a feast to talk over what they should do to help or harm. In any event, they wanted to have some fun with the mortals above ground. That has always been the way with kabouters. They are in for fun first, last, and always. So, with punches and hammers, they made counterfeit money. Then, in league with the elves, they began also to delude misers and to make them believe that much money makes men happy. A long time after the mint had been built, 2 kabouters met to talk over their adventures. "It is wonderful what fools these creatures called men are," said the first one. "There's old Freck. He has been hoarding coins for the last 50 years. Now he has a pile of gold in guilders and stivers, but there's hardly anything of his old self left. His soul is as small as a shrimp. I whispered to him not to let out his money in trade, but to keep it shut up. His strong box is full to bursting, but what went into the chest has oozed out of the man. He died last night, and hardly anybody considers him worth burying. Someone on the street today asked what Freck had left behind. The answer was, Nothing, he took it all with him, for he had so little to take. That's jolly, said the old kabouter, who was a wicked-looking fellow. I'll get some fun out of this. To shrivel up souls will be my business henceforth. There's nothing like this new-fangled business of getting money that will do it so surely. So this ugly old imp went snooping around, as the Dutch say, about people who sneak and dodge in and out of places to which they ought not to go, and in houses where they should not be found. This imp's purpose was to make men crazy on the subject of making money when they tried, as many of them did, to get rich quickly in mean ways. Sorry to tell, the imp found a good many promising specimens to work upon at his business of making some wise men foolish. He taught them to take out of their souls what they hoarded away. To such fellows, when they became misers, he gave the name of Shem, which means a shadow. It was believed by some people that such shriveled-up wretches had no bowels. Soon after this, a great meeting of kabouters was held in the dark realms below ground. Each one told what he had been doing on the earth. After the little imps had reported, the chief kabouter, when his turn came, cried out, I shall tell of 3 brothers, and what each one did with the first silver penny he earned. Go on, they all cried. I've caught one Shem Young. He married a wife only last year, but he won't give her 1 gulden a year to dress on. He skimps the table, pares the cheese till the rind is as thin as paper, and makes her live on skim milk and barley. Besides this, he won't help the poor with a stiver. I saw him put away a bright and shining silver penny, fresh from the mint. He hid coin and pocketbook in the bricks of a chimney, so I climbed down from the roof, seized both, and ran away. I smeared the purse with wax and hid it in the thick rib of a boat by the wharf. There the penny will gather mold enough. Ha, ha, ha. At this, the little imps broke out into a titter that sounded like the cackle of a hen trying to tell she had laid an egg. Good for you, serves the old Shem right, said a good kabouter who loved to help human beings. Now I'll tell you about his brother, who has a wife and baby. He feeds and clothes them well and takes good care of his old mother. Almost every week he helps some poor little boy or girl that has no mother or father. I heard him say he wished he could take care of poor orphans. So when he was asleep at night, I whispered in his ear and made him dream. Put away your coin where it won't get moldy, and show that a penny that keeps moving is not like a rolling stone that gathers no moss. Deliver it to the goldsmiths for interest, and leave it in your will to increase until it becomes a great sum. Then, long after you are dead, the money you have saved and left for the poor weezies, orphans, will build a house for them. Then, long after you are dead, the money you have saved and left for the poor weezies, orphans, will build a house for them. It will furnish food and beds, and pay for nurses that will care for them, and good women who will be like mothers. Other folks, seeing what you have done, will build orphan houses. Then we shall have a waste house, orphan asylum, in every town. No child without a father or mother in all Holland will have to cry for milk or bread. Don't let your penny mold. The 3rd brother, named Spillpenny, woke up on the same morning with a headache. He remembered that he had spent his silver penny at the gin house buying drinks for a lot of worthless fellows like himself. He and his wife, with little to eat, had to wear ragged clothes, and the baby had not one toy to play with. When his wife gently chided him, he ran out of the house in bad humor. Going to the tap room, he ordered a drink of what we call Dutch courage, that is, a glass of gin and drank it down. Then what do you think he did? Tell us, cried the imps uproariously. He went into a clothing house, bought a suit of clothes, and had it charged. That's it. I've known others like him, said an old imp. Now it was Kermis Day in the village, and all that afternoon and evening this spendthrift was roistering with his fellow Zabzaks, boon companions. With them it was always drunk, always dry. Near midnight, being too full of gin, he stumbled in the gutter, struck his head on the curb, and fell down senseless. Her husband not coming home that night, the distracted wife went out early in the morning. She found several men lying asleep on the sidewalks or in the gutters. She turned each one over just as she did buckwheat cakes on the griddle to see if this man or that was hers. At last she discovered her worthless husband, but no shaking or pulling could awake him. He was dead. Now there was a covetous undertaker in town who carted away the corpse, and then told the widow that she must spend much money on the funeral in order to have her husband buried properly, or else the tongues of the neighbors would wag. So the poor woman had to sell her cow, the only thing she had, and was left poorer than ever. That was the end of Spill Penny. A jolly story, cried the kabouters in chorus. Served him right. Now tell us about Vrek the miser. Go on. Well, the saying, much coin, much care, is hardly true of him, for I and my trusty helpers ran away with all he had. With his first silver penny, he began to hoard his money. He has been hunting for years for that penny, but has not found it. It will be rather moldy should he find it, but that he never will. Why not? Asked a young imp. For a good reason. He would not pay his boatmen their wages, so they struck and refused to work. When he tried to sail his own boat, it toppled over and sunk, and Vrek was drowned. His wife was saved the expenses of a funeral, for his carcass was never found, and the covetous undertaker lost a job. What of the third one? They asked. Oh, Mynheer Eerlijk, you mean. No harm can come to him. Everybody loves him, and he cares for the orphans. There will be no Mouldy Penny in his house. Then the meeting broke up. The good kabouters were happy. The bad ones, the imps, were sorry to miss what they hoped would be a jolly story. When 1,000 years passed away, and the age of newspapers and copper pennies had come, there were no descendants of the two brothers Spilpenny and Shem, but of Mynheer Eerlijk there were as many as the years that had flown since he made a will. In this document, he ordered that his money in guilders of gold and pennies of silver should remain at compound interest for 400 years. In time, the ever-increasing sum passed from the goldsmiths to the bankers and kept on growing enormously. At last, this large fortune was spent in building hundreds of homes for orphans. According to his wish, each girl in the asylum dressed in clothes that were of the colors on the city arms. In Amsterdam, for example, each orphan child's frock is half red and half black, with white aprons, and the linen and lace caps are very neat and becoming to their rosy faces. In Friesland, where golden hair and apple-blossom cheeks are so often seen with the white lace and linen, someone has called the orphan girls apples of gold in pictures of silver. Among the many glories of the Netherlands is her care for the aged and the orphans. One of the 30 generations of the Eerlijks read one day in the newspaper, "Last week, while digging a very deep canal, some workman struck his pickaxe against timbers that were black with age and nearly as hard as stone. These, on being brought up, showed that they were ribs of an ancient boat. Learned men say that there was once a river here, which long since dried up. All the pieces of the boat were recovered, and under the skillful hands of our ship carpenters have been put together, and the whole vessel is now set up and on view in our museum. We'll go down tomorrow on our way home from school and see the curiosity, cried one of the Air League boys, clapping his hands. Wait, said his father, there's more in the story. Today, the janitor of the museum, while examining a wide crack in one of the ribs which was covered with wax, picked this substance away. He poked his finger in the crack and finding something soft, pulled it out. It was a rough leather purse, inside of which was a coin, moldy with age and dark as the wood. Even after cleaning it with acid, it was hard to read what was stamped on it, but strange to say, the face of the coin had left its impression on the leather, which had been covered with wax. From this, though the metal of the coin was black and the mold thick on the coin, what they saw showed that it was a silver penny of the age of Charlemagne, or the 9th century. Charlemagne is French, father, but we call him Karl the Groot, or Charles the Great. Yes, my son, don't you hear Karl's clock, the curfew sounding? 'Tis time for little folks to go to bed. The farm that ran away and came back. There was once a Dutchman who lived in the province called Drenthe. Because there was a row of little trees on his farm, his name was Ryer van Boompjes, that is, Ryer of the Little Trees. After a while, he moved to the shore of the Zuiderzee and into Overijssel. Overijssel means over the IJssel River. There he bought a new farm, near the village of Bloksel. By diking and pumping, certain wise men had changed 10 acres of sand and heath into pasture and land for plowing. They surrounded it on 3 sides with canals, the 4th side fronted on the Zuiderzee. Then they advertised in glowing language the merits of the new land, and Ryer van Boompjes bought it and paid for his real estate. He was as proud as a popinjay of his island, and he ruled over it like a czar or a kaiser. A few years before, Ryer had married a kezel, as the Dutch call either a nun or a maid who is no longer young. At this date, when our story begins, he had 4 blooming but old-fashioned children with good appetites. They could eat cabbage and potatoes, rye bread and cheese by the half-peck, and drink buttermilk by the quart. In addition, Ryer owned 4 horses, 6 cows, 2 dogs, some roosters and hens, a flock of geese, 2 dozen ducks, and a donkey. Yet although Ryer was rich, as wealth is reckoned in Drenthe, whence he had come, he was greedy for more. He skimped the food of his animals. So much did he do this, that his neighbors declared that they had seen him put green spectacles on his cows and the donkey. Then he mixed straws and shavings with the hay to make the animals think they were eating fresh grass. When he plowed, he drove his horses close to the edge next to the water so as to make use of every half-inch of land. When sometimes bits of fenland from his neighbors' farms got loose and floated on the water, Ryer felt he was in luck. He would go out at night, grapple the boggy stuff, and fasten it to his own land. After this had happened several times, and Ryer had added a half-acre to his holdings, his greed possessed him like a bad fairy. He began to steal the land on the other side of the Zuiderzee. In the course of some time, he became a regular land thief. Whenever he saw or heard of a floating bit of territory, he rowed his boat after it by night. Before morning, aided by wicked helpers who shared in the plunder and were in his pay, he would have the bog attached to his own farm. All this time he hardly realized that his ill-gotten property, now increased to 12 acres or more, was itself a very shaky bit of real estate. In fact, it was not real at all. His wife one day told him so, for she knew of her mean husband's trickery. About this time, heavy rains fell for many days and without ceasing, until all the region was reduced to pulp and the country seemed afloat. The dikes appeared ready to burst. Thousands feared that the land had an attack of the disease called fall, and that the soil would sink under the waves as portions of the realm had done before in days long gone by. Yet none of this impending trouble worried Ryer, whose greed grew by what it fed upon. In fact, the first day the sun shone again, quickly drying up parts of his farm, he had 2 horses harnessed up for work. Then he drove them so near the edge of the ditch that plow, man, and horses tumbled, and down they went into the shiny mess of mud and water. At this moment also, the water from below the bottom of the Zuider Zee welled up in a great wave like a mushroom, and the whole of Ryer's soggy estate was on the point of breaking loose and seemed ready to float away. The stingy fellow, as he fell overboard, bumped his head so hard on the plow beam that he lay senseless for a half-hour. He would certainly have been drowned had not Pete, his stout son, who was not far away, had seen the tumble, ran to the house, launched a boat, and rowed quickly to the spot where he had last seen his father. Grabbing his daddy by the collar, he hauled him, half dead, into the boat. Between his bump and his fright and the cold bath, old Ryer was a long time coming to his wits. With filial piety, Pete kept on rubbing the paternal hands and restoring the circulation. All this, however, took a long time, even an hour or more. When his father was able to sit up and talk, Pete started to row back to the little wharf in front of his home. But where was it? The farm, with the house and fields. Whither had they gone? Ryer was too mystified to get his bearings, but Pete knew the points of the compass. Yet his father's farm was not there. He looked at the shore of Overijssel, which he had left. Instead of the old straight lines of willow trees with the church spire beyond, there was a hollow and empty place. It looked as if a giant, as big as the world itself, had bitten out a piece of land and swallowed it down. Dumbfounded, father and son looked, the one at the other, but said nothing, for there was nothing to say. Meanwhile, what had become of the farm and the Kwezel, as the neighbors still called her, that is, the mother with the children? These good people soon saw that they were floating off somewhere. The mainland was every moment receding further into the distance. In fact, the farm was moving from Overijssel northward, towards Friesland. One by one, the church spires of the village nearby faded from sight. But when the wind changed from south to west, they seemed as if on a ship with sails set and to be making due west for North Holland. The younger children, so far from being afraid, clapped their hands in glee. They thought it great fun to ferry across the big water, which they had so long seen before their eyes. Their stingy father had never owned a carriage or allowed the horses to be ridden. He always made his family walk to church, whether it were to the sermon in the morning or to hear the catechism expounded by the Domine in the afternoon. All the family had to tramp on their wooden shoes there and back. As for the floating farm, the cows could not understand it. They mooed piteously, while the donkey bayed loudly. At night and day after day, no one could attend properly to the animals to see that they were fed and given water. One always sees a big tub in the middle of a Dutch pasture field. Neither ducks nor geese nor chickens minded it in the least, but the thirsty cattle and horses at the end of the first day had drunk the tub dry. None of the dumb brutes, even if they had not been afraid of being drowned, could drink from the Zuider Zee, for it was chiefly sea water, that is, salt, or at least brackish. Occasionally this errant farm, that had thus broken loose, passed by fishermen, who wondered at so much land thus adrift. Yet they feared to hail and go on board, lest the owners might think them intruding. Others thought it none of their business, supposing some crazy fellow was using his farm as a ship to move his lands, goods, and household, and thus save expense. In some of the villages, the runaway farm was descried from the tops of the church towers. Then it furnished a subject for chat and gossip during 3 days to the women as they milked the cows or knitted stockings, to the men also while they smoked or drank their coffee. It was a lively topic. There were real people on it and a house and stables, said the sexton of a church, who declared that he had seen this new sort of a Flying Dutchman. It was the usual sight: cow, dog, and stork, and then he quoted the old Dutch proverb. At last, after several days, and when Ryer and his son were nearly finished, with fatigue and fright, in trying to row their boat to catch up with the runaway farm, they finally reached a village across the Zuider Zee in North Holland, where rye bread and turnips satisfied their hunger, and they had waffles for dessert. Their small change went quickly, and then the 2 men were at their wits' end to know what further to do. By this time, out on the floating farm, the mother and children were wild with fear of starving. All the food for the cattle had been eaten up. The dog had no meat, the cat no milk, and the stork had run out of its supply of frogs. There was no sugar or coffee, and neither rye nor currant bread or sliced sausage or wafer-thin cheese for anyone, but only potatoes and some barley grain. Happily, however, in drifting within sight of the village of Oosterbeek, the mother and the children noticed that the east wind was freshening. Soon they descried the tops of the church towers of North Holland, the smell of cowls and cheese, and of burning peat fires from the chimneys, made both animals and human beings happy as the wind blew the island westward to the village. Curiously enough, this was the very place at which, by hard rowing, Ryer and Pete had also arrived. Father and son were sitting in the hotel parlor, with their eyes down on the sandy floor, wondering how they were to pay for their next sandwich and coffee, for their money was all gone. At that moment, a small boy clattered over the bricks in his klomps. He kicked these off at the door and rushed into the room. He had on his yellow baggy trousers, and his hair, of the same color, was cut level with his ears. Half out of breath, he announced the coming afloat of what looked like a combination of farm and menagerie. A house, a woman, some girls, a dog, a cat, and a stork were on it and afloat. At once, old man Ryer, still stiff from his long, cold bath, hobbled out, and Pete ran before him. Yes, it was Mother, the children, and all the animals. For the first time in his life, the mean old sinner felt his heart thumping in grateful emotion under his woolen jacket with its 2 gold buttons. Something like real religion had finally oozed out from under his crusted soul. A whole convoy of boys, fishermen, farmers, and a fat vrouw or 2 volunteered to go out and tow the runaway farm to the village wharf. They succeeded in grappling the float and held it fast by ropes tied to a horse post. That night all were happy. The farm was made fast by another rope put round the town pump. Then the villagers all went to bed. They were happy in having rescued a runaway farm, and they expected a good loon reward from the rich old Ryer who, in the bar-room, had talked big about his wealth. As for the Van Bompias, in order to save a landlord's bill for beds, they slept in their house, on board the farm, amid the lowing of their cattle that called out in their own way for more fodder, while the people in the village wondered at roosters and crowing out on the water, and evidently the barnyard birds were frightened. And so they were, for before midnight, when all other creatures were asleep and not even a mouse was stirring on land, whether hard fast or floating, the west wind rose mightily and blew to a terrific gale. In a moment the tow lines that held the vagrant farm to the village pump and horse post snapped. The Van Bompias' estate left the wharf and was driven at a furious rate across the Zuider Zee. For several hours, like a ship under full sail, it was pushed westward by the wind. Yet so soundly did all sleep, man and wife, children and hens, that none awakened during this strange voyage. Even the roosters, after their first concert, held in their voices. Suddenly, and as straight as if steered by a skilled pilot, the Van Bompias' farm, now an accomplished traveler after its many adventures, shot into its old place. This took place with such violence that Ryer Van Bompias and his wife were both thrown out of bed. The cows were knocked over in the stable. The dog barked, supposing someone had kicked him. One old rooster jostled off his perch, set up a tremendous crowing that brought some of the early risers out to rub their eyes and see what was going on. Hemel en aard, bliksem en regen. Heaven and earth, lightning and rain, they cried. The old farm is back in its place. In fact, the Van Bompias' real estate was snugly fitted once more to the mainland, and again in the niche it had left. It had struck so hard that a ridge of raised sod 5 inches high marked the place of the junction. At least 20 fishes and wriggling eels were smashed in the collision. From that day forth, the conscience of the Van Bompias returned, and he actually became an honest man. He sawed off, from time to time, portions of his big farm, and returned them home with money paid as interest to the owners. He found out all the mynheers whose bits of land had drifted off. He sent a tidy sum of gold to the village in North Holland where his farm had been moored for a few hours. With a good conscience, he went to church and worshipped. His action at each of the 2 collections, which Dutch folks always take up on Sunday, was noticed and praised as a sure and public sign of the old sinner's true repentance. When the deacons, with their white gloves on, poked under his nose their black velvet bags hung at the end of fishing poles 10 feet long, this man, who had been for years a skinflint, dropped in a silver coin each time. On the farm, all the animals, from duck to stork and from dog to ox, now led happier lives. And the family all declared that the behavior of the farm and the wind of the Zuider Zee had combined to make a new man and a delightful father of old Van Bompias. He lived long and happily, and died greatly lamented. When wheat worked woe. Many a day has the storyteller wandered along the dikes which overlooked the Zuider Zee. Once there were fertile fields and scores of towns where water now covers all. Then fleets of ships sailed on the bosom of Lake Flevo and in the river which ran into the sea. Bright and beautiful cities dotted the shores, and church bells chimed merrily for the bridal, or tolled in symphony for the sorrowing. Many were the festal days, because of the wealth which the ships brought from lands near and far. But today the waters roll over the spot, and the dead cities of the Zuiderzee are a proverb. Yet all are not dead in one and the same sense. Some lie far down under the waves, their very names forgotten because of the ocean's flood, which in one night, centuries ago, rushed in to destroy. Others languished because wealth came no longer in the ships, and the seaports dried up. And one, because of a foolish woman, instead of holding thousands of homes and people, is today only a village nestling behind the dikes. It holds a few hundred people, and only a fragment of land remains of its once great area. In the distant ages of ice and gravel, when the long and high glaciers of Norway poked their cold noses into Friesland, Stavoren held the shrine of Stavo, the storm god. The people were very poor, but many pilgrims came to worship at Stavo's altars. After the new religion came into the land, wealth increased, because the ships traded with the warm lands in the south. A great city sprang up, to which the counts of Holland granted a charter, with privileges second to none. It was written that Stavoren should have the same freedom which a free city enjoys from this side of the mountains, the Alps, to the sea. Then there came an age of gold in Stavoren. People were so rich that the bolts and hinges and the keys and locks of their doors were made of this precious yellow metal. In some of the houses, the parlor floor was paved with ducats from Spain. Now in the city lived a married couple whose wealth came from the ships. The man, a merchant, was a simple-hearted and honest fellow who worked hard and was easily pleased. But his wife was discontented, always peevish and never satisfied with anything. Even her neighbors grew tired of her whining and complaints. They declared that on her tombstone should be carved these words: she wanted something else. Now, on every voyage made by the many ships he owned, the merchant charged his captains to bring home something rare and fine as a present to his wife, some pretty carving or picture, a roll of silk for a dress, a lace collar, a bit of splendid tapestry, a shining jewel, or it may be a singing bird, a strange animal for a pet, a barrel of fruit, or a box of sweetmeats was sure to be brought. With such gifts, whether large or small, the husband hoped to please his wife. But in this good purpose he could never succeed, so he began to think that it was his own fault. Being only a man, he could not tell what a woman wanted. So he resolved to try his own wits and tastes to see if he could meet his wife's desires. One day, when one of his best captains was about to sail on a voyage to the northeast, to Danzig, which is almost as far as Russia, he inquired of his bad-tempered Frau what he should bring her. "I want the best thing in the world," said she. "Now this time, do bring it to me." The merchant was now very happy. He told the captain to seek out and bring back what he himself might think was the best thing on earth, but to make sure, he must buy a cargo of wheat. The skipper went on board, hoisted anchor, and set sail. Using his man's wits, he also decided that wheat, which makes bread, was the very thing to be desired. In talking to his mates and sailors, they agreed with him. Thus all the men, in this matter, were of one mind, and the captain dreamed only of jolly times when on shore. On other voyages, when he had hunted around for curiosities to please the wife of the boss, he had many and anxious thoughts, but now he was carefree. In Danzig, all the ship's men had a good time, for the captain made goed koop, a fine bargain. Then the vessel, richly loaded with grain, turned its prow homeward. Arriving at Stavoren, the skipper reported to the merchant to tell him of much money made, of a sound cargo obtained, of safe arrival, and above all, plenty of wheat, would please his wife, for what on earth could be more valuable than wheat, which makes bread the staff of life? At lunchtime, when the merchant came home, his wife wanted to know what made him look so joyful. Had he made coup de cope that day? Usually at mealtime, this quiet man hardly spoke 2 words an hour. To tell the truth, he sometimes irritated his wife because of his silence, but today he was voluble. The man of wealth answered, "I have a joyful surprise for you. I cannot tell you now. You must come with me and see." After lunch, he took his wife on board the ship, giving a wink of his eye to the skipper, who nodded to the sailors, and then the stout fellows opened the hatches. There, loaded to the very deck, was the precious grain. The merchant looked up, expecting to see and hear his wife clap her hands with joy. But the greedy woman turned her back on him and flew into a rage. "Throw it all overboard into the water," she screamed. "You wretch, you have deceived me." The husband tried to calm her and explain that it was his thought to get wheat as the world's best gift, hoping thus to please her. At that moment, some hungry beggars standing on the wharf heard the lady's loud voice, and falling on their knees, cried to her, "Please, madam, give us some of this wheat, we are starving." "Yes, lady, and there are many poor and stubborn in spite of all its gold," said the captain. "Why not divide this wheat among the needy? If you are greatly disappointed, you will win praise for yourself. In the name of God, forgive my boldness and do as I ask. Then on the next voyage I shall sail as far as China and will get you anything you ask." But the angry woman would listen to no one. She stayed on the ship, urging on the sailors with their shovels until every kernel was cast overboard. "Never again will I try to please you," said her husband. "The hungry will curse you, and you may yet suffer for food because of this willful waste, which will make woeful want. Even you will suffer." She listened at first in silence, and then put her fingers in her ears to hear no more. Proud of her riches, with her voice in a high key, she shouted, "I ever want? What folly to say so! I am too rich." Then, to show her contempt for such words, she slipped off a ring from her finger and threw it into the waters of the harbor. Her husband almost died of grief and shame when he saw that it was her wedding ring which she had cast overboard. "Hear you all, when that ring comes back to me, I shall be hungry, and not before," she said, loud enough to be heard on ship, wharf, and street. Gathering up her skirts, she stepped upon the gangway, tripping to the shore, and past the poor people who looked at her in mingled hate and fear. Then haughtily she strode to her costly mansion. Now, to celebrate the expected new triumph and to show off her wealth and luxury, with the numerous curiosities brought her from many lands, the proud lady had already invited a score of guests. When they were all seated, the first course of soup was served in silver dishes, which everyone admired. As the fish was about to be brought in, to be eaten off golden plates, the butler begged the lady's permission to bring in first from the chief cook something rare and wonderful that he had found in the mouth of the fish, which was waiting, already garnished, on the big dish. Not dreaming what it might be, the hostess clapped her hands in glee, saying to those at the table, "Perhaps now, at last, I shall get what I have long waited for, the best thing in the world." "We shall all hope so," the guests responded in chorus. But when the chief cook came into the banquet hall and, bowing low, held before his mistress a golden salver with a finger ring on it, the proud lady turned pale. It was the very ring which in her anger she had tossed overboard the day before. To add to her shame, she saw from the look of horror on their faces that the guest had recognized the fact that it was her wedding token. This was only the beginning of troubles. That night her husband died of grief and vexation. The next day the warehouses, stored with valuable merchandise of all sorts, were burned to the ground. Before her husband had been decently buried, a great tempest blew down from the north, and news came that 4 of his ships had been wrecked. Their sailors hardly escaped with their lives, and both they and their families in Stavoren were now clamoring for bread. Even when she put on her weeds of grief, these did not protect the widow from her late husband's creditors. She had to sell her house and all that was in it to satisfy them and pay her debts. She had even to pawn her ring to the Lombards, the goldsmiths of the town, to buy money for bread. Now that she was poor, none of the former rich folks who had come to her grand dinners would look at her. She had even to beg her bread on the streets, for who wanted to help the woman who wasted wheat? She was glad to go to the cow stalls and eat what the cattle left. Before the year ended, she was found dead in a stable in rags and starvation. Thus her miserable life ended, without a funeral, but borne on a bier by 2 men. She was buried at the expanse of the city in the potter's field. But even this was not the end of the fruits of her wickedness, for the evil she did lived after her. It was found that from some mysterious cause a sandbar was forming in the river. This prevented the ships from coming up to the docks. With its trade stopped, the city grew poorer every day. What was the matter? By and by, at low tide, some fishermen saw a green field under the surface of the harbor. It was not a garden of seaweed, for instead of leaves whirling with the tide, there were stalks that stood up high. The wheat had sprouted and taken root. In another month, the tops of these stalks were visible above the water. But in such soil as sand, the wheat had reverted to its wild state. It was good for nothing, but only did harm. For while producing no grain or food, it held together the sand, which rolled down the river and had come all the way from the Alps to the ocean. Of old, this went out to sea and kept the harbor scoured clean, so that the ships came clear up to the wharves. Then, on many a morning, a wealthy merchant whose house was close to the docks looked out of his window to find the prows of his richly laden ship poked almost into his bedroom, and he liked it. Venturesome boys even climbed from their cots down the bowsprits onto the deck of their fathers' vessels. Of such sons, the fathers were proud, knowing that they would make brave sailors and navigate spice ships from the Indies. It was because of her brave mariners that Stavoren had gained her glory and greatness, being famed in all the land. But now, within so short a time, the city's renown and wealth had faded like a dream. By degrees, the population diminished, commerce became a memory, and ships a curiosity. The people that were left had to eat rye and barley bread instead of wheat. Floods ruined the farmers and washed away large parts of the town, so that dikes had to be built to save what was left. More terrible than all, the ocean waves rolled in and wiped out cities, towns, and farms, sinking churches, convents, monasteries, warehouses, wharves, and docks, in one common ruin hidden far down below. To this day, the worthless wheat patch that spoiled Stavoren is called Frauensand, or the Lady's Sand. Instead of being the staff of life as nature intended, the wheat, because of a power of evil greater than that of 1,000 wicked fairies, became the menace of death to ruin a rich city. No wonder the Dutch have a proverb which might be thus translated: peevishness perverts wheat into weeds, but a sweet temper turns a field into gold.